Okay, so I just want to go over a little basics of the macroing skills in this game. So this is probably worth watching before you dive into any actual macroing. So the first thing that we want to look at is the exhausted skill levels. So if you type /exhausted in game, you're going to see something like this just below it pop up that says you cannot gain in this skill today. This is a bit outdated and you don't really need to worry about it during macroing. But you will start seeing it once you hit these specific skill caps during your day. So if you go from 0 to 80.1 in a single day, you're going to start seeing a message like this. The second day, 80.1 to 87.1, you're going to start seeing a message like this. This used to mean there was a skill cap, but that's not true anymore. All it means is you can no longer get active gains. But since you're macroing, you're not going to be getting active gains, and this doesn't matter. So while macroing, you can ignore this completely, these exhausted messages that you're going to see. These only apply if you're actively playing the game, and we can discuss that in a later video. So the next thing that you want to know is we should talk about is the skill gain rates. To start off with, there's absolutely no difference between macroing in town or outside of town. So there's not really any point in you putting your character in the middle of a forest to macro. What you want to do is put it beside an NPC that's going to call guards for you, and most preferably in an area where there's not going to be a lot of players around, and also in an area where the NPCs are not going to path away. So I always like to find small houses in towns that have several NPCs in them, like say for example the butchers and scarabray. There's a lot of NPCs in there and they don't really path very far, so if anyone does steal or attack from you, they're going to be guard whacked immediately. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that they can't, if they were really dedicated, kill you or completely rob you, but it's going to take them a very long time to do that, and it's unlikely they're going to waste their time doing that. So this is generally a fairly safe way to macro. Now if you want to get a little more risky, you can macro in dungeons. And in dungeons, you're going to get a 20% bonus to your skill gain rate per dungeon level you're on. So, for example, if you're on Shame 1, you're going to get a 20% bonus. If you're on Shame 4, you're getting an 80% bonus. It's a pretty big deal. The problem, of course, is that you can be PK'd a lot easier if someone finds you. So that you just have to decide what you want to do there. Now, there's a penalty if you macro most skills inside your house, and it's a 50% penalty. This does not apply to trade skills. So things like blacksmithing, tailoring, etc., those are not going to get that that debuff. So those are safe to macro in your house, although they're difficult to macro, if not impossible. But you can skill them up in your house without any penalty as well. So the one thing you want to know, though, is there is an active skill gain bonus in this game. So if you want to actually play the game, you're going to skill up a lot faster than macroing. This doesn't really matter for certain skills that cost nothing, but for things like magery, where you actually have to use regs to level it up, if you're a new player, it may be too expensive for you to just macro that straight to 100, so you might want to consider just actively doing that. The gains are very large. The active gain bonus is very large, and it's worth considering. If you macro magery, for example, it's going to cost you about 200k, but if you actively leveled magery, it's probably only going to cost you 40k. Plus, you're going to make money killing monsters while you do that. So that's just something to consider when you're deciding what you want to do. So the next thing we want to look at is which skills are macroable and which ones aren't, and some of the differences between them. So you can see here we kind of have a list of things that are not macroable. Those are just pretty much that there's just not really any realistic way to do it. Especially with the trade skills, there's not really any way that you can do that, and you kind of have to do that manually. And then the next thing we can move into is the semi-macroable one, and there's only one really skill in this game that is a problem with, is poisoning. So with this one, you can kind of macro it, but you can only macro it for about 20 minutes before you run out of items, so you have to keep refilling your macro. But it's still macroable in that kind of sense. The next ones that we want to talk about are ones that don't take over your computer, which means you can essentially just use your in-game, the in-game macro system, and then you can do something else on another account, or you can play another game while you're doing it. These ones are very simple to macro, and you can kind of look at the videos that are also on this channel that show specifically how to do these ones. The next ones we want to talk about is the ones that actually take over your computer. And what I mean by this is that you're going to have to use a third-party program like Tiny Task or AutoHotkey, essentially an auto clicker, to run these things for you, because there's not really any specific way in-game for the in-game macro to do these ones at this time. However, that might change in the future, but for now, these ones are a little bit harder to macro in that you have to give up your computer while you're doing it. So I usually do these when I go to work or when I go to sleep. And then the last one there are is the ones that require multiple accounts. So with that being said, they're actually pretty easy to macro for the most part, other than the barding ones. But you just need 2 characters. So what's going to be happening is you're going to probably be attacking your alt. Your alt's going to have healing, and it's going to heal itself while you swing your bow or your dagger or at it. And then you're going to gain the skills like archery, fencing, tactics, etc. Same thing with parrying, except the opposite, where you're going to be blocking attacks from an alt. But we'll get into those specific ones later. So that's all we need to know for now. And if you want to actually see how to macro these skills, just check out the other videos.